Welcome to the USC channel here at the Voice of College Football. I'm Matt Zemek with Ethan Inman of Trojans Wire, fellow colleague, and Crashlet Collier. Sorry for being 3 minutes late. Some of the elements of the interface that we use to generate this broadcast haven't been working. Sounds like a metaphor for USC football right now, coming off the game against Notre Dame. This all seems very Freudian on in here. So guys, as we start our show, we don't have a football game this upcoming weekend. So tonight's really a good time to have a big picture look at USC football. Ethan's written a couple of think pieces. We'll get to those in the middle of the show because we all want you to gather around the campfire, the virtual campfire, known as YouTube, in the first 15 to 20 minutes. And, so after about 20 minutes, we'll get out the marshmallows, the graham crackers, and the s'mores. We'll have a good, grand old time chewing on Ethan's think pieces that he's written at Trojans Wire. But before our virtual campfire begins, let's just, kind of take the general broad view, think about some big questions at USC. And I think just the first thing, Ethan and Crash, is, all right, we've had 48 more hours to process the Notre Dame game, the state of the team, the course of the season. Does anything feel different 48 hours later? Like when we had our review show on Sunday, we all had our venting sessions, our soapbox rants, our fierce takes. Does anything about it feel different? Were we too soft on USC, or were we a little too harsh? Ethan, does anything feel different 48 hours later?
I think, it's kind of interesting looking back at the show and as I do, and have done for the show, and just to kind of, process what we talked about, how we, what topics we could talk about next time and whatever. I think that we talked a lot about the offense and not a lot about the defense, which is interesting because the offense was definitely better than the defense, even though the offense made critical errors. So I think, it's kind of funny, but also kind of sad because it just goes to show how little hope we have in the defense, that it wasn't that such a bad performance wasn't even that significant for us to talk about. We could certainly, relitigate some of the defensive issues if we wanted to, because we really didn't go into it all that much. And then, I think one thing in particular, Lincoln Riley said today at practice, I saw something that he said that he's been impressed with Jaden Walker, the linebacker, and that he thinks that he'll have a chance to earn a bigger role as the season goes on. And that did remind me of a play sequence at the very end of the game where Jaden Walker came off the edge and made an impact on 2 plays in a row. And I was just kind of where has this been the whole game? Why haven't I seen this from Jaden Walker, Danton Lynn, whoever needed to make that decision or make that adjustment to make that happen. And so I think, that comment from Lincoln Riley made me think of that. And that's kind of, I think, been a general opinion from a lot of USC fans throughout the season, is that they need to get Jaden Walker more involved because he's shown some flashes of real athleticism and decisiveness. And 2 plays in a row, he put up a good performance there. So I don't know. Another really weird stat actually that I saw today, which has nothing to do with the Notre Dame game necessarily, but I thought it was really odd, and I put it on my Twitter, is that the leader in pass breakups at USC is not who you think it would be. It's little used cornerback Kevin Longstreet, who has 4 pass breakups, and he's only played in 4 games, and he only has 4 tackles. But he's leading the team in pass breakups. And I think Bishop Fitzgerald has 2, and then nobody else has more than 1. So it's just kind of, I don't know, it was a really weird, odd stat. I'm not saying it's good, bad, or whatever, but it was just puzzling. I was like, we're 7 games in, and our leader in pass breakups is Kevin Longstreet. Kind of interesting. But yeah, I don't know. So those are kind of the 3 things that have come up for me, and they're all small. None of them are huge, but since the show on Sunday.
I'm kind of going to go in a bit of a different direction. Kind of just thing that's been sitting with me, especially since I was in South Bend on Saturday, was just, I'm still just sitting with just, is this the last one of these rivalries for the Jewel Shillelagh? Just, especially just ending in South Bend, and then just there's no certainty going forward. There's no clarity. And then obviously we did that bonus cut last week with where I played the clip of my interview with Petros Papadakis from over the summer. You should all listen to it on my podcast. Go check it out if you're a subscriber. Full interviews on my podcast behind the caution tape. But what's really sticking with me is just Petros had another clip on his show, Petros and Money, last night that I ended up listening to. And it just was really sitting with me, just like some of the points he was making of just, it's just so dumb. And he's like calling Lincoln Riley soft, wondering, is he even just fit to be the head coach on that alone? So I just thought it was really interesting. And I also found it interesting that Ryan Karchi in his Times of Troy newsletter yesterday brought up that Notre Dame could be doing more to negotiate, and cited Michigan. And I'm not saying it wasn't valid, but Karchi is a Michigan alum, so I could see how he's a little bummed out about that. But just, this is such a big rivalry. And I think just the fact that fans can't just know, okay, we get a chance at revenge. If you're a USC fan, or if you're a Notre Dame fan, okay, we get to go to the Coliseum next year and keep trying to beat down the Trojans and keep our extend our winning streak to 4 games. Just, I think all of that, just everything that just goes with this rivalry is just like, it's kind of sad. And I'm just kind of still struggling to just come to reality with it. Because even though I didn't really grow up a USC fan, didn't really get into SC sports until I got to USC and really embraced being a Trojan, I always just always recall seeing USC Notre Dame in the paper. If I was traveling through the airport and they were playing, you would always just, your eyes would be drawn to the TV. So I think for the fact that just fans can't look forward to that, it's kind of sad, and I'm really still struggling to process it. So that's kind of just what's been sitting with me since we last all spoke.
I think there'll be a chance to further dive into that particular topic as we go on, because there's no USC game this week, and I do want to talk about the Big Ten, and that kind of ties into USC's playoff prospects. And the value and significance of playing that Notre Dame game. So we'll circle around to that topic as we go along. But I think Ethan wanted to talk a little bit about the USC defense. Let's do that. And hey, boy, Jeff Rodriguez, he's on fire here. A lot of pointed and I think on point comments from Jeff, as always, one of our most loyal viewers here on the USC channel, the voice of college football. It's fundamentals, not scheme. Someone should sit Stevens and teach him to look at the line and determine run versus pass. It's less about the Notre Dame game. We aren't stopping the run at all. Against Illinois, we certainly didn't do that. And the linebackers, it's not just the D-line. That's an absolutely great point, Jeff. And as we continue, Lincoln Riley, he's probably right, but seems to be like there's enough hate for everybody right now at USC. When things are going wrong, that's how it goes. And who would have thought 2 years into Lynn with more talent is worse against the run? You know what? So this brings up a point, and I don't know if either of you guys saw this. I saw this just before we came onto the air, so the three of us did not really have a chance to discuss it at length, before going on. But I'm not sure who tweeted it. I think it was a beat reporter. Not sure which one, but Lincoln Riley apparently said that Notre Dame and Michigan were equally physical, and that in this game it was not understanding the positions, the fits, the angles, the assignments. I have a hard time taking that at face value 100%. I think that he doesn't want to admit that his team's soft, because it is. Lincoln Riley just, he's not the kind of guy who's just going to say, you know what, I totally screwed up. I mean, he said that about the play call, but on a larger philosophical, structural level, he's not going to admit that, my modus operandi is failing. He's not the kind of guy who's just going to, completely dress himself down over micro elements, micro details, yes, but not the big picture. But that's what I'm upset about. It's the big picture. We're here in year 4. CJ Carr of Notre Dame plays poorly, and yet USC's giving up runs on 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8. That is not entirely about positioning and tactics. That's just you're getting your butt beat. I made the point on Sunday that, all right, if you're thinking pass on 3rd and 7 and they slip a run by you once, all right, tip the cap, they fooled you. But no, this happened repeatedly. Like, that is the difference, right? I think that is the essential thing. And like, over 300 rushing yards. You can't say that Notre Dame and Michigan were equally physical. I'm sorry, Lincoln. Like, I just do not buy that for a minute. So, Ethan and Crash, Pete Carroll had, of course, Tell the Truth Monday. So here it can be Tell the Truth Tuesday. Like, I do not see a culture of accountability on this defense. And after seeing D'Anton Lynn do such a great job last season, like there was no question, like he dramatically improved Alex Grinch's leftovers and just did a really solid job. It was akin to what he did at UCLA in 2023. Why are we here? And why are we dealing with this stuff in late October, where the coach seems to want to defend his team's toughness, but in exchange for that, he wants to say just how poorly fundamentally schooled everything was. Like, this is a disaster. Like, everyone's just trying to make up stuff and throw it against the wall and see if it sticks. Ethan Inman.
Yeah, I mean, I saw that comment too. And I think it was Connor Morsetti who tweeted it out, because that was at least where I saw it. It's possible that multiple beat writers tweeted it out. The Connor Morsetti tweet says, Lincoln Riley says he thought the physicality defensively against Notre Dame was the same as Michigan, but the defense just missed assignments and wasn't as in sync. And so, yeah, my immediate thought is that's not better. It's not a better outcome. Like, I don't know. And it's not even really true. Like, there were so many broken tackles. Like, I mean, just think back to the kickoff return touchdown. Like, they had opportunities to bring down Jadarian Price multiple times inside the 25-yard line, and he ends up returning it for a touchdown because of like 3 or 4 missed tackles. So, and it was like holistic, and I don't even think it's necessarily such a, I don't know. I don't understand why in this situation he thinks it's better to have had people missed assignments because I think it reflects better on him if it's just like, oh, we just still don't have the physicality or the talent, but we, at least we're coaching them right. And at least we're, telling them where to go, and they're just getting bullied and they're just getting beat. It's kind of like, it goes back to that 4th and 1 call, where he tried to have Maava throw it to Lake McCree instead of just running it up the middle. Like, you make the calls that are winning, calls that make sense in a football sense. And then if your players get beat, then it's not on you. It's on them for, not stepping up to the moment and not being physical enough to win the play or win the entirety of the game. So I don't know. And it's just also like holistically in terms of how D'Anton Lynn's defense has worked this year, it's very much a defense that has looked on their heels, especially in the secondary. Like they play such soft coverage, and the whole game, it was like they were waiting for CJ Carr to uncork some 75-yard touchdown pass, which, to be fair, for most of the season, he has done that. But he wasn't doing it he wasn't even completing his 8-yard passes on Saturday. So I don't know, how at halftime they didn't realize, okay, like, let's actually make CJ Carr beat us in this game, especially after it started raining, which started happening at halftime. Let's make CJ Carr beat us in this game instead of assuming that, he's going to make good throws, because he's obviously having a bad day and it's not getting any better. And it never did. It never got any better. So, yeah, I just don't get that comment. Also, you brought up Alex Grinch. Another very unfortunate thing that I found out this weekend is that Alex Grinch's UCF defense is ranked 16th in the FBS. And USC is ranked 70th. So Alex Grinch is actually doing pretty okay. I mean, it's against worse competition, but it's also with theoretically worse talent. So I don't like that that's the case. Like, I mean, I am, after last year, I was as on board with D'Anton Lynn, and I was like, oh, it's obviously an Alex Grinch problem and blah, blah, blah. Like, I don't want this to be a Lincoln Riley problem, but the things that have come out in the last couple of days, it's just like, oh man, like, I'm not even 100% sold that it's a Lincoln Riley problem, but it just has caused me to rethink it a little bit because it's just really peculiar that all of a sudden Alex Grinch is doing not great. It's not like he has a top 5 defense in the country, but he's doing pretty solid under Scott Frost, who was horrible at Nebraska. So it's not like a Scott Frost thing either, I don't think. I mean, Scott Frost is probably more comfortable at UCF, but Danton Lynn suddenly looks worse. I don't know. So it's really quite a puzzling situation.
Well, it's interesting you bring up Alex Grinch because I think I've read I'm not saying obviously his defenses were great before he started working with Riley, but it's they were decent. They weren't terrible like they were, especially kind of those years at Oklahoma, especially the 2 years at USC. So I'm wondering, is there something with that, with working with Lincoln Riley, that is can cause coordinators to sometimes struggle, which I think is certainly just interesting to see.
Well, Crash, I mean, here I can give you a very clear answer there. Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma, if you followed Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma, he would win games against Texas Tech and Oklahoma State 66-52, 52-41. His Oklahoma offenses so frequently maxed out that the defense just didn't matter. It was kind of an afterthought. Just defense just had to force 1 or 2 field goals per game, and that was going to be enough because Oklahoma was hanging half 100 that. See, that's, I think, one of the things that it's worth stepping back and reflecting on is that Lincoln was just absolutely in his wheelhouse at Oklahoma as a play caller. He's had some really good moments this season at USC, obviously 2022 as well. But at Oklahoma, it was just kind of machine cranked. You would take it for granted that Oklahoma was going to score at least 40 when it took the field for a Big 12 game, and it very often got into the 50s. I watched plenty of Oklahoma football, 2017 through 2020, and I saw plenty of those Big 12 shootouts where if you weren't scoring 35, you were getting dusted. You weren't just losing; you were going to get beat by at least double digits, if not 3 scores. Dana Holgerson's West Virginia, Oklahoma played 62-52 type games against so many different teams in the Big 12, so that is the constant, right? That if a Lincoln Riley offense is not hanging 50 or at least 45, it's big trouble in River City. And so when if this USC offense just stubs its toe 2-3 times, that's enough to lose. And the defenses have pretty much remained the same. So it goes to the top, right? It goes to the man in charge. It goes to the leader at the top of the pyramid. This is not an accident. And I know that Trumaine Carroll, his presence as strength coach is an upgrade from Benny Wiley, and it's not going to be fully felt until next season when he gets a full off-season cycle in the weight room with a lot of these guys. And actually, if Lincoln Riley said, you know what, I made a mistake bringing Benny Wiley with me from Oklahoma, and we're kind of caught in between a training cycle with our strength and conditioning program, hey, that's actually a logical answer. Probably would have been a better way to finesse this, but to say, well, we're not lining up well, and our fundamentals are bad. Is that's supposed to make us feel better? So it really is kind of wild. But anyway, Crash, the Lincoln Riley, the Lincoln Riley coin is a 2-sided coin where the one side is the genius part where, we're scoring 59 points. We're scoring 66. Wow. Laser light show all the time. Greatest show on turf. And the other side of that coin is if you don't get that laser light show, you lose against a good team with a good offense. So that's part of the Lincoln Riley mystery here at USC. All right, we're 20 minutes in. So I want to give Ethan the floor here for a little bit. And, Ethan's just joined Trojans Wire. So Ethan's writing some think pieces because Ethan's a really smart guy. That's why we have him here on this show. So Ethan, you wanted to write about, standouts on defense. And obviously standouts on defense is kind of a relative term since the defense hasn't been great. But you're trying not to just hate on everybody. That's why we love you, Ethan, because you're about love, not hate. So talk about this think piece that you did regarding, at the middle of the season during this off week, just some of the defensive notables for USC that you can see on the screen here at Trojans Wire.
Yeah, so I was, I think this kind of came from me earlier today looking at just some of the stat sheets. And, I mentioned that little stat that I saw about Kevin Longstreet. He's not in this article, but it was, just a lot me, picking out a lot of interesting stats and realizing, that there are a few players who've really stood out defensively. And, it goes hand in hand with my watching as well. These are players that I've seen play well. And then, I just thought it was interesting how that's shown up in the stat sheet as well. And so I just was kind of inspired to shout out some players who have done well and on defense, because, I think the defense as a unit, as it should, has gotten a lot of flack from a lot of the fan base. And so I just kind of wanted to look at, who are the defensive players that USC can rely on, when they're able to hold Purdue to 17 points or hold Michigan to 13 points. Like, why is that? Or whatever other teams that they've played this season and played decently defensively. And so I kind of got down to a few, and Eric Gentry is the obvious one. And I think, every USC fan would have guessed before the season that he'd be one of the best players on this defense and also during the season. Bishop Fitzgerald has been incredible. And, he's obviously has the 5 interceptions, which leads the entire country, which I didn't know until today, but he's first in the entire country in interceptions. Obviously also has the pick 6, but I think what really stood out to me about Fitzgerald's numbers is he's been a great tackler. He's second on the team in tackles. And I think I've also seen that kind of manifest on the field. Like, I felt like in the Notre Dame game, he was one of USC's best tacklers. He made a couple of tackles to save, potential first down plays that ended up becoming fourth down. So he saved he saved USC a few times and stalled a few Notre Dame drives, I thought. So, Bishop Fitzgerald, also shout out Devin Tompkins, because I think, his name doesn't really get brought up as much as it should. And he's the best player on the best unit on this defense, which is the defensive line. And that, that alone kind of warrants consideration for him being the most valuable player on this defense. And then, shouted out a couple of the younger defensive linemen as well, Braylon Shelby and Cam Crawford. And then I also talked about DeCarlos Nicholson, which is more of an eye test thing than a box score thing. But, he's the one kind of relatively reliable, I think is the word that I used, relatively reliable cornerback on this defense, and in a position that is very decimated and very desperately needs at least some reliability. So those are kind of my guys. I ended up picking Bishop Fitzgerald as my personal defensive MVP at this point in the season. So I'd be curious, what you guys have to say about that, if you guys have any different takes on who the defensive MVP is. I think, in my mind, it really comes down to Fitzgerald or Eric Gentry. And I picked Fitzgerald over Eric Gentry for 2 reasons. And the first reason is because I think Eric Gentry kind of came into the season as a known commodity, like he's a linebacker, so he's supposed to make the most tackles on the team. And he's also been at USC for 4 years, and this is now his 5th year of college football. He's supposed to be a leader. And, when he's been on the field for USC, he's already been a star. So people kind of expected this out of him, I guess. Whereas with Bishop Fitzgerald, he had a great year last year at NC State, but like nobody really knew what he was at USC before this year. And so for him to really kind of come out and prove that to Trojan fans, I think is really cool. And then I also think my second reason is, leading the country in interceptions has to count for something, first of all. And then second of all, like, he has really stepped up in the biggest moments, in my opinion. Like, I think whereas Gentry's play, I'd say Eric Gentry's 2 worst games have been the Illinois game and the Notre Dame game, which also happen to be 2 USC's losses. That could be an argument for his value, if it's that him playing worse means that he's clearly, and USC losing means that he's clearly the most valuable player on the team. You could take it that direction if you wanted. But I think that in contrast, Bishop Fitzgerald has really stepped up and played his best games when USC is, kind of needed it. And I think his best game of the year was against Michigan. He had 2 picks and he also had the sack and had a good handful of tackles as well. And then, he played really well against Notre Dame, had like a season high with 10 total tackles, which was tied for the team lead. And like I said, had a couple of really key tackles there to save USC on defense. And also had the 2 picks against Purdue. So, and that was USC's first real road Big Ten win, which was also important for the program's foundation. So I kind of pick him. But then, I'm curious what your guys' takes on this whole topic is.
Go ahead, Crash.
So I thought it was definitely a really interesting article to see break it down, Ethan, and really just talk about kind of who those guys are. And I was kind of, when you were kind of getting to, who the MVP is, Gentry or Fitzgerald, I was going to lean Gentry kind of for a lot of the reasons you're saying. He's been here well. He knows the scheme. He, leads the team in tackles. But then you mentioned that his 2 worst games were the 2 losses for USC. So then I was just thinking, wait a sec, what about Fitzgerald? He's had big moments even in those losses, especially Illinois. And so, but then also he's just been really consistent this year. And like you said, he's also came in and no one really knew who he was. Whereas like Eric Gentry, I mean, all you had to do was just, as soon as Rob Ryan got to USC, pretty much, he was already just raving out what he'd be able to do. Gentry's like, what was he like? He's like, oh, he's like the unicorn, we can do so much. He's got these vines. So pretty much my point of imitating Ryan there was that they kind of knew what they were going to be able to do with Gentry. I'm not saying that's bad. I think it's great that Rob Ryan knew that he could come in and really just, utilize all of Gentry's strengths. But I think for Fitzgerald to come in kind of out of nowhere and really just solidify himself and be a huge presence for this defense, I'm going to agree with you, then it makes him the MVP.
So I'm going to answer the defensive MVP question this way. Now, young folks such as yourself, I'm old, you're young, but for older folks such as me, we remember Bino Cook. Bino Cook, the ESPN analyst and also college football historian, who was a regular face on television in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s. And he would make historical references. He'd weave historical references into his on-air commentary. Like Army would shut out an opponent, and Bino Cook would say, well, the United States hasn't had a Secretary of Defense that good since the FDR administration. Something like that. And here's a direct quote from Bino Cook, being the college football historian that he is. He was fond of saying, there are 2 teams you never bet against at home, the Russian Army and Notre Dame. I mean, that's Bino Cook. That's how he rolled. So I'm going to use a Bino Cook style expression. It's not something he actually said, okay, but it's something he would say. That having a defensive MVP for this 2025 USC team is like saying that Germany and Japan had a defensive MVP in World War II. Like, you don't hand out MVP awards for losers, or teams that are second rate, second fiddle, that lose in the big moments. So, like, I want to give a defensive MVP award. I do. Like, I want this team to do well. I want to love people for achievements, but like, we need to achieve something. We need to achieve something first. Then I'll give out hardware and trophies. And that really, to me, speaks about the culture of USC right now, the situation we have at USC right now. It's just not working. And obviously, there's a lot to consider in terms of the road forward. And so now we go to Ethan's other big think piece from the past 72 hours here at Trojans Wire. And, Ethan, you brought up the point. It was such a well-made point, like every point you make on Sunday, that, we have this great ballyhooed 2026 recruiting class coming in to USC, but you know what? Any incoming recruiting class, that's freshmen, and freshmen generally don't instantly become rock stars. Like we're seeing that with Jakeem Stewart, for instance. Like, you don't figure it all out right away. That's not the norm. That's not the usual progression at the collegiate level. You need a couple years. And so USC fans are going to say, 2026 recruiting class, do we really think Lincoln Riley's going to figure it all out just because one big recruiting class comes? Like, I don't want Lincoln Riley coaching into 2027 unless we get to the playoff in 2026. So, Ethan, you wrote about what can actually save Lincoln Riley at USC. Like, he can't just wave the magic wand and say, oh, 2026 recruiting class, all these guys are going to be instant studs. No, that's not how it works. You had a deeper, more fleshed out perspective, and you can look at this on the screen. I'm going to scroll down, but just take us through the thought process of this article and like how your picture of Lincoln Riley at USC is evolving, even if USC itself doesn't seem to be evolving.
Yeah, so I mean, there has just been a lot of talk throughout all the offseason, and I think that, at this point comes up every time, someone kind of, and it's a lot of people who are trying to preserve hope in Lincoln Riley, which is, I understand it. Like I've done it myself plenty of times, but, people say, oh, just wait for 2026, then he'll get so many of, his players, his recruiting class in there. It's USC's first full recruiting class. And like, I just don't think that we're going to see the benefits of that recruiting class for another couple of years. At the soonest, because freshmen don't just come in and be, immediately the best players on your team. Now, could some of them be immediate stars? Yes. Could a small percentage of that recruiting class, which I think is like 30, 40 players almost now. It's really big. Could like 3 or 4 of them come in and be starters and good college football players immediately? Yes. I pointed out that this year there's really 2 freshmen that are true freshmen that I've thought have been, solid contributors, and Jakeem Stewart's one of them. Even though he's been inconsistent, he's had real flashes of great play. A couple great tackles for loss. He kind of had his coming out party in the Michigan State game. And then Tanuk Hines is the other one, because Tanuk Hines seems to be becoming a bigger part of this offense as the season goes on. He was one of the better receivers in the Notre Dame game, and you could argue that he was the most consistent receiver because he wasn't dropping balls like Jacoby Lynn, and he wasn't, getting locked up so much like Makai Lemon was. So, but those are just 2 guys out of like the whole freshman class, and there's a lot of other freshmen that people would hope to contribute this year, like RJ Sermons. Alex Graham was obviously hurt, but there's a good handful. Floyd Boucard also did pretty good before he got hurt, but there was a larger handful. The 2 freshman running backs are a great example of this. Like people kind of thought before this game, like, oh, we've got these 2 freshman running backs named Harry Dalton III and Riley Wormley. Like maybe they'll, kind of help with the absence of Wayman Jordan and of Eli Sanders, because they're not going to play against Notre Dame. And that didn't happen. And it's because they're freshmen. You can't blame them, right? They just don't have any college football experience. They weren't going to be ready to impact this game kind of at a moment's notice. So the things that I kind of talked about that Lincoln Riley can fix, instead of just relying on this recruiting class to come in and step in and unseat all of the upperclassmen and immediately be stars, is first of all, he has to fix his play calling. And we talked about this on the show on Sunday quite a bit, but his play calling in general, obviously still very good. He's still a great offensive mind and has been for most of the season. Thought that other than, his call to go for the touchdown too quickly at Illinois, and, this past game against Notre Dame, his play calling's been great. But in high pressure situations, he seems to be uniquely bad. And I think the reason why, I talked about it on Sunday, so I won't go into a ton of depth about it, is that because he just gets too stressed out. So I said he needs to, kind of reassess, whether that's just like looking inward and seeing why he gets, so kind of, too creative almost, I guess, is kind of the word that I would use, or the phrase that I would use. He just gets really kind of strung out in these situations, I guess, and makes decisions that aren't the simplest, most common sense decision. So, that's kind of that was kind of one thing, is like, if he can just learn, it's not necessarily about getting rid of the anxiety, because like Lincoln Riley is a human being. Of course, he's going to be stressed, especially if he's a competitive person. And, I would be stressed if I was the head coach of USC and, we were in an important game in a crucial situation. It's just about like noticing the stress in yourself, kind of as as a detached person, and then also like making decisions in spite of that, I think, and not letting the stress guide your decision making. So that was kind of my first thought. And then my second thought was, he really needs to he really needs to handle the rest of this 2025 slate. And that is kind of my main frustration. Like, I mean, I kind of came into the show on Sunday and I was like, hey, 10,000 foot view, we were expected to lose this game before the season started. And so it shouldn't be incredibly shocking that we're losing to the runner-up from last year, the college football playoff runner-up, who has a more established program and, was playing on their home field in the rain, which favors them, and, just has had more time to kind of build up, like, has had more good time with, I don't know exactly what I'm trying to say there. So ignore that train of thought I was just going down. But because of where Notre Dame was a year ago and where USC was a year ago, like everyone was predicting USC to lose this game before the season started. So like that, losing to Notre Dame, especially it being a non-conference game, is not actually the end of the world in my head. In terms of USC making the playoff and in terms of overall program, like obviously I want to beat Notre Dame because they're our rivals, but it's not the most devastating loss. I'm way more angry personally about the Illinois loss because that's a team that we should beat. They were clearly an inferior team to USC, and they did not have a good defense. They did not have a good offensive line, and USC still got kicked around by them, and got kept in it because of a couple of lucky turnovers, and so that's what really frustrated me. And then that's what frustrated me last year, and that's what frustrated me the year before. It was not necessarily like, oh, we lost to Michigan at the Big House in our first true Big Ten road game, or, oh, we lost to Penn State in the Coliseum in like kind of an all-time game. It was like, oh, we lost to Maryland in their only conference win of the entire season. And this year it was, oh, we lost to Illinois, a team that had just gotten boat raced by Indiana the week before and, had very clear weaknesses. So this season presents 4 opportunities to go and beat the teams that we're supposed to beat. We're a better football team than Nebraska. I can say that unequivocally, having watched both teams pretty extensively to this point. We are a better football team than Northwestern. We're a better football team than Iowa, and we're a better football team than UCLA. Okay, so those are 4 games that we need to just handle business. If we win the Oregon game, awesome. I will be ecstatic. But if we lose the Oregon game, again, it's another game that everyone thought we would lose before the season started. So that's kind of my thoughts there. Is Lincoln Riley just needs to really lock in on handling business in the games that we're supposed to win. And then obviously, like I said, if he handles Oregon too, that's just kind of a bonus there. And then, in terms of the freshman class, like they're not going to step in and, take really, I guess, established roles on this team right away. But there are players that are, and those players that are on this team right now. So there are a lot of players on the roster who we need to really work really hard on retaining. Because there's a long list of really key players on this team who could leave due to the draft or just due to graduating. Jaden Mayava, Makai Lemon, Jacoby Lane, Wayman Jordan, Eli Sanders, Lake McCree, Anthony Lucas, Eric Gentry, Christian Pierce, Bishop Fitzgerald, DeCarlos Nicholson, and Kamari Ramsey. And that was just like off the top of my head and off the top of the roster. Oops, sorry. That was an ad from the Trojans Wire website. So that was that's a long list. And, the players that are going to step in and replace them are players like Tanook Hines and Jakeem Stewart and, Hushon Longstreet if Mayava leaves, and Walker Lyons. Those are the guys who could be college football stars next year and not the freshmen. So it's about developing them and getting them to stay, because especially like someone like Walker Lyons, like Ryder Lyons is going to BYU, and BYU right now is 7-0 and ranked number in the top 15 in the country. So Walker Lyons has plenty of reason to consider going to Provo, and we need to make sure that he doesn't do that. We need to keep him here and, obviously develop them. So last year USC lost some, and it wasn't pieces that they've necessarily needed, like Zachariah Branch and Deuce Robinson are the 2 that come off the top of my head. But we can't have this roster is not deep enough that we can have that happen again. Like, we can't have like Tanook Hines feeling like he was underutilized and, going to Georgia. Like, that doesn't work. We need to keep the guys who are clearly talented and, aren't necessarily the superstars, but are up and coming, because they're going to need to be the superstars next year. There's a lot of guys who are leaving. And so that was kind of my thoughts on that. And then,
all right, Ethan. So a lot of things to consider, and folks, like, that's the kind of analysis you get at Trojans Wire with Ethan Inman now on board. Crash, boy, Ethan Inman gave you a buffet table. Like, this was country buffet or whatever buffet place you might like to go to. Like, this was all you can eat. Sit down for 2 hours and feast of the various morsels that Ethan put forth. Which ones do you want to chew on for a little bit, or do you want to go in a different direction with just your own kind of path for Lincoln Riley to save himself for the remainder of this season and on into next season at USC?
Matt, I'd really like to talk about the, especially Ethan's thoughts about the incoming 2026 class, because I talk a little bit about every week on wearesc.com with Scott Schrader. We talk about the recruits, all that stuff. So I have a little bit of insight into it. So I definitely want to talk about that for sure. I think obviously a lot of these guys who are going to come in are going to need to, some of them will definitely assume big roles, but then others are definitely have to wait their turn for a couple of years as they develop, get stronger, just get better at the game of football. But also, especially just for a couple reasons based on the guys who leave, the guys who stay, guys who transfer, there are going to be some of these guys who leave, who just end up decommitting. And I mean, really, as we've learned, especially in this day and age with NIL, the transfer portal, now revenue sharing, I don't want to say a commitment isn't like, I don't want to say it's not like, I know it's obviously not binding, but it's not as much of a guarantee as it was until, pen goes to paper. It's like, I mean, we've seen it all over the country now. I mean, the most notable one was Dante Moore, committed to Oregon, flips to UCLA on signing day. Or even Julian Lewis, who was initially supposed to be here, didn't completely flip on signing day, but, flipped about a month before he was set to sign with USC, which is ultimately what led the Trojans to pursue Hassan Longstreet. So I think it's really interesting but I think also if USC can't, go, Ethan, kind of moving on to another your point about how Lincoln Riley can save his season. If USC doesn't show they can, develop guys and get wins in the second half, guys might also leave, not just because, I might not play, but, I might not get developed well. I might not get, I'm going to be on a losing team. Like, there are other things. It's obviously, I mean, I'm not trying to, and obviously, I mean, the paycheck is going to matter too, but then also a lot of these guys who are talented enough are looking those top guys who have the NFL potential are looking, all right, okay, maybe I got to take a little bit of money, but but if I decommit now, I can have a shot at going to a program where I'll get to win more and or play more. And that'll probably help boost my NFL stock over my time in college. So I think guys are kind of looking at all of that. So it's really, I think, interesting. So I think really USC needs to really just show that they can develop guys now and get wins. And I mean, I thought you bringing up Walker Lyons was such an interesting point, Ethan, because obviously his brother Ryder Lyons is committed to BYU. He's probably going to go there. And what's to stop Walker, especially considering they're a Mormon family too? Walker served a mission. Ryder's set to serve one. What is to stop Walker Lyons if he feels he's not being properly utilized? I mean, obviously it seems like he's got a great relationship with Lake McCree and that they don't seem, and at least like on the field, they really seem to be hyping each other up. Like they're kind of each other's biggest supporters. Like whenever one scores a touchdown, usually the guy first there to celebrate him is the other guy. If 85 scores, 87's there to celebrate him. 87 scores, 85 is celebrating him. But obviously if Lyons doesn't think he can get, that's kind of like, he's maybe feels like he's reached his ceiling at USC. What is him to stop from going to BYU, especially with the success they're having? He's a Mormon and his brother's going there. So I think that was a really interesting example of just not only do you have to work on retaining the roster you've got now, but also the guys you got coming in. So I really thought there was a lot there, Ethan, and obviously I'm trying to do my best to, get a bit of morsel of everything you put out on the buffet table.
And no milkshakes as part of that buffet.
No milkshakes. No
Yeah.
milkshakes. No hamburgers.
Yeah. So, folks, we're going to come back at you on the other side. We're going to talk about the Big Ten, right? This is kind of the week to step back, look at the Big Ten, because, next Tuesday it's going to be Nebraska game preview. We focus on a specific opponent, but if there's ever a time to talk about the Big Ten in the middle of the season, it's this week on our show. Of course, no Sunday show because there's no USC game to review. We're going to be coming back at you next Tuesday for the Nebraska preview. So Big Ten talk on the other side. We'll see you in a minute. Let's get this ad in from the voice of college football.
College football is even more exciting when you've got some action on the line, and the games are even better when you're cashing in. And the voice of college football is the place to be to get the greatest value. Start with my picks. 75% against the money line, 58% against the spread, and I've got a 40-plus year track record. 11-0 in the college football playoff for me last year against the money line, 8-3 against the spread. And I'm just the warm-up act. Steve Merrill of Wager Talk is our ace in the hole, show stopper. 7 years with the voice of college football, over 30 years in the industry. Steve gives us analysis on all the big games, but you can't miss Steve's weekly under-the-radar pick. 28-12 against the spread the last 3 years. You also get picks from some of our top analysts here at the Voice of College Football, including Corey Bratta, Matt Zemek, and Steve Dace. Check out those numbers. Become a YouTube or Patreon member for just $99 per month. Go to the main channel on YouTube, click join, and then select the betting tier. Do the same thing on Patreon. Make 2025 a winner now.
And we want to remind you that Mark Rogers' national show here at the Voice of College Football, Mondays through Saturday, 6 nights a week, 10 p.m. in the East, 7 p.m. in Los Angeles, and the rest of the West Coast. So follow Mark Rogers for his national college football insight at the Voice of College Football. And if you want to support us at the USC channel, look at that camo VOCFB cap. And Ethan, once again, modeling the USC cap. You buy a USC branded piece of merch from our shop. It goes to support the USC channel. You can get a USC shirt in the various varieties. There's all sorts of other things, coffee mugs, tumblers as well. Look around the site at vocfb.com/shop. That's one way you can support the USC channel. And the other way that you can support the USC channel here at the Voice of College Football, you go on to our YouTube homepage. So our USC YouTube homepage, there it is. You click that join button in the middle of the screen, and you come on to the middle Heisman tier or the top national champion tier. You get those bonus cuts, Heisman national champion tier. You get these bonus segments that Ethan and Crash and I have been turning out. So bring your fork and knife for those bonus cuts. Where we've produced I believe 6 of them. We're going to continue to produce more of them. Exclusive insider access, and your donation helps the USC channel here at the Voice of College Football. All right, so final segment of the show with no USC game coming up this week. It's good to just step back and take a look at the Big Ten. And I have another side gig writing for College Wire, or College Sports Wire, rather. It's part of the USA Today network, the Gannett Corporation, where, Ethan and I write for Trojans Wire. And I was assigned to do Big Ten power rankings. I'm not having this Big Ten segment because of that, but it just kind of fits together because it's a good time to take stock of the Big Ten. This league is not very good. I'm sorry. Ohio State, Indiana, Oregon, the three, if this was the Big Ten Olympics, we all know who the gold, silver, and bronze medalists would be. And after that, it's a lot of uncertainty. Illinois has lost twice, but those 2 losses are to Indiana and Ohio State. So it's not as though Illinois has lost a game it shouldn't have lost. USC has. And the middle of this conference is really mushy. UCLA has won 3 conference games, but does anyone really think UCLA is any good? UCLA is going to go play Indiana this Saturday. That we get the true measurement of the Bruins when they go to Kurt Signetti's lair in Bloomington. But Minnesota dog walking Nebraska, Michigan State being horrible, Penn State being 0-4. In the Big Ten, like who's the fifth, sixth, seventh best team in the Big Ten? Like, good luck with that. Good luck figuring it out and being able to say with ironclad confidence, who's really good after the top three. Like, top three is clear, bottom three is clear. Purdue gets shut out by Northwestern. You go to the basement for that, and Michigan State and Wisconsin are total disasters. But so the top three, the bottom three. But what about this middle 12, Ethan Inman? Like, how do you make sense of this huge jumble in this vast, mushy middle of the Big Ten Conference so far?
Oh, yeah, I think it's going to make these next couple of months really interesting. Last year and Nebraska plays Northwestern this weekend, and I'm going to be paying close attention to it, as all USC fans should be, because USC's next opponent is Nebraska. But that's a game that I would have been pretty certain, especially because Nebraska's at home, that they would have won last year. Even though Nebraska's better this year than they were last year, I feel like that's totally, I'm not confident Nebraska's going to win after how they did last week, So there's just so many games like that. Iowa plays a lot of different, a lot of these teams play each other, like Iowa, Minnesota, who are both 3-1 in conference, and are both tied, for third place. Oregon, Northwestern, USC, Iowa, Michigan, Minnesota, UCLA. What a jumble of teams. What, at the beginning of the year, those teams being tied for third place in the Big Ten would have been quite, people would have been shocked if you would have told them that, and then Illinois and Nebraska being worse than that jumble of teams so far in the conference. And Washington as well. I think we're going to get a lot more clearer picture once a lot of these teams play each other, I would hope. And I think it presents real opportunity for USC because, looking at the Big Ten, USC has a chance to kind of state their case as at least the fourth best team in this conference if they go out and, like I said, beat the teams that they're supposed to. Let's run through their schedule, right? They play Iowa, Northwestern, and Nebraska, and UCLA. Three of those teams are 3-1 in conference right now. They're three of those teams, which it's not. I would have thought Nebraska would be one of them. It's not Nebraska. It's UCLA, Iowa, and Northwestern. Those are teams that they can, kind of help get out of their way by beating them the rest of the season. And then obviously, if they beat Oregon, great. And, they could end up having the third best record in the conference. And then maybe we're talking about, them flirting with the college football playoff appearance. But it's, this is how USC starts to kind of rise in the conference rankings. It's taking advantage of this year. Anytime there's a year like this where the stuff is up for grabs, seemingly, I think they need to take advantage of it, especially against lesser opponents. So, whatever team does that, whether it's USC or another team, is going to, be in really good standing, not just for this year, but for next year as well.
Well, I think it's really interesting just because of how much parity there is. And you could say you could make the argument as the Big Ten slowly starting to turn to the Big 12. There's a case to be made because the Big 12's defining characteristic is parity. And parity, at least just when you're a casual fan just watching a game, just being wait, this could go either way. I thought there was a clear favorite. It just makes it much more entertaining, much more exciting. You don't know what's going to happen. It's kind of like the NFL. Just in that regard. And I think it's what makes the sport great is when you can not know, even if there is something UCLA is supposed to get walloped by Penn State and they pull off the upset, or Penn State's supposed to wallop Northwestern, another upset, James Franklin's out. That sort of stuff is just really entertaining, makes great storylines all year long. But I think it also at the same time does come with a cost. Parity also makes it harder for you to have clear-cut teams. You have your three clear-cut teams, but is a fourth one going to emerge that can really prove to be a feasible college football playoff contender? And I think also I want to talk about this point because I want to look at the bigger picture of what the Big Ten is trying to do with what happens next with this playoff expansion. Because obviously the SEC and Big Ten, as we all know, basically get to call the shots on what happens. But the SEC, to the surprise of the Big Ten, is we should do 5-11, not this ridiculous automatic qualifier model, which for the record, I am absolutely against. I think you got to earn it on the field, either by being one of the top 5 champions or an at-large team within the rankings that are deemed that the commit based on number with the remaining spots. You got to fill with at-larges. You can't just be doing this stuff and literally for this reason. So if the Big Ten is trying to get some sort of push some automatic qualifier model in, and I mean, there's the one ridiculous 24-28 with like 7 spots each to the SEC and Big Ten, which I think that's too big. I think honestly 12 is good. I can see 16, but it's got to be just pretty much 4 more at-larges. And the Big Ten in some ways is hurting itself by doing this. Even if they do maybe have the best 2 teams in the country who could end up playing for the national title, and let's just bear with me, Ohio State and Indiana, even if one of them wins the whole thing, just their presence and them not having as many teams in the SEC looking like they could ram 4, possibly 5 teams in there this year, it definitely makes the case for the SEC's model, especially when the Big 12 and ACC, even if they kind of just have to not accept a second-tier status, are also siding with the SEC's model. So I really find it interesting, not just for what's going to happen this year in terms of how many teams the Big Ten gets in the playoffs, but what happens in the next edition of the playoff when it gets expanded, and if that even does happen. So I'm really interested to see like what happens and how this affects the Big Ten's leverage in the negotiations with the SEC and the other conferences as they discuss with ESPN what the new format will be if it does change at all in 2026.
Yeah, I'm all for rewarding conference championships. You play most of your games against, your known opponents in your backyard. It's the vast majority of the schedule. But like anything, there just should be some guardrails. Like, I don't want to punish conference champions, but, here's the parallel. Like in the NFL, we've seen teams with losing records win, the NFC South, or just a really bad division. They get in the playoff. If you're 8-1, you don't deserve to go to the playoffs. You didn't win a majority of your games. So there should just be strings attached. If you win your conference and you're 9-3, no, you don't get an automatic bid. If you win your conference and you are at least 10-2, you get an automatic bid. Like you just need to attach a few stipulations, qualifiers, and we could make a better system. But I just hate this blanket. You win your conference, you're in. But okay, what if you're 8-4? And that could certainly happen in like the Big 12, or maybe Miami loses a couple more games in the ACC. Like Clemson was a 3-loss ACC champion last season, but got in because of the automatic qualifying provision. I don't like that. You need to win more games. No, you can't just be playing FCS cupcakes, of course, and you can have regulations on that. Like you're only allowed 1 FCS opponent. If you have 2 FCS wins, like you don't meet that, the 10-2 threshold, you'd have to go 11-1. Just we can just put in guardrails. But anyway, Crash, I promised you that we would talk more about USC Notre Dame relative to this Big Ten conversation, relative to the college football playoff. What I just can't get around, and people can say that Notre Dame should just sign the USC agreement. Notre Dame should just adhere to USC's wishes, and like in a perfect world, that's what would happen. But we know this is not a perfect world, and I would just kind of like to think that USC, why worry so much about the logistics of this thing? And not that they're irrelevant, but that. First off, you need to have a program that's good enough to make the playoff no matter what. Like if USC has a 2005 or 2004 caliber team, it's not going to matter when Notre Dame is on the schedule, right? Like that. Just there are certain things that matter most, and there are certain things that matter secondarily, that are lower on the totem pole. If USC is just kicking butt left and right, 34-game winning streak, and we're playing conquest every week, who cares? All this stuff doesn't matter that much. It's not entirely irrelevant, but it certainly takes second place. And like that's people think I'm too negative on Lincoln Riley, but you know what? When you look at the soft product on the field, and you kind of sense this hemming and hawing about, well, if we play Notre Dame, that could complicate things. Like, I don't want to hear about complications. I want to hear about putting the boot on the throat of the opponent and winning a bleepity bleeping big road game for once. Like, that's what's supposed to matter most. But, so like we're coming off this Notre Dame game, and Crash, you expressed the worry, which is widely felt and shared, that, is this going to be it? And my response is, boy, USC, just be good. Be good at what you're supposed to be good at. And let everything else fall into place. It just speaks to so much insecurity. I get, going to bat for athletes and making sure the logistics are not wildly irresponsible. But you know what? This isn't about that. We haven't won in South Bend since 2011. If we had been winning regularly in South Bend, are we really having this conversation? I don't think so. Crash Collier.
Well, you actually brought up an interesting point of just, just stepping on the boot of your opponent. And just like, it reminds me of what Ed Orgeron said when he was at LSU. Like, I've talked about this a lot with my dad. We talk a lot as just sports and stuff, trade ideas. It's really fun, like, especially at breakfast. We talk about this stuff a lot after we go surfing. But I remember he loves bringing this point up about what Coach O said when he was at LSU I think it was after he was interviewed and they won the SEC. He's like, Coach, you care where we play? He's like, no, just send them our way. And then also Pete Carroll is just like, Pete Carroll played tough schedules. Granted, you kind of had to even have a shot at the national championship back then. But still, Carroll was scheduling very aggressively at Hawaii, home and home with Auburn. If my memory is serving me.
Ohio State.
Ohio, yeah. But you get the idea. He was scheduling aggressive schedules in addition to Notre Dame. And not only is that schedule make fans more excited, I think, but it also is just like it shows you're not afraid to take anyone on. And that's something I kind of wish would come back. And I really, really just miss, especially after, getting to see in person how special this rivalry is, not just to the Trojan family, but also to all the Notre Dame fans out there. Like, they care about this. And I mean, just having talked to former athletes and asked questions about this rivalry, all the ones I've talked to played in the Pac-12. I've yet to interview a current USC football or former USC football player who's played since USC joined the Big Ten. It's still just interesting just hearing how much this rivalry means to them. So I think even though they didn't have that same travel logistics, it's like you're going to even threaten to take that away from them. It's just really just sad. So I wish they would just, be like, all right, we're going to just schedule this aggressively. And if you know what, we want to pursue another home and home, we'll do that on top of it as well.
Ethan.
So I talked about this a little bit in the article that we were talking about earlier. And, I think that they should keep the Notre Dame game for a very, very similar reason that you said, Matt. Like, it just prepares you better for winning in the conference schedule. And that point kind of makes me, I don't really agree with it, but it makes me understand a little bit more the like USC point of view that maybe you want to move it earlier in the season so you can learn those lessons sooner and, have it prepare them for conference play earlier. Because I think obviously you can learn a lot from a Notre Dame game that happens in South Bend in October when there's still 5 games left in the season. But like, if you're, playing Notre Dame in the last game of the year in the Coliseum, then maybe, those lessons that you learn don't matter as much unless, you're in the playoff already or, you're headed to a bowl game. So, that I'm not as mad about that, I suppose. But I do think, like, as a larger point, they need to extend this rivalry because, like you said, you can't be afraid of people, but also because it doesn't affect your conference record. And I think, and so, kind of taking it back to the 12-team playoff era and the potential 16 playoff era, like, conference record matters much more. And this is kind of actually why I'm kind of okay with them factoring in conference record much more heavily than overall record, is because if your conference record matters a lot and your overall record doesn't really matter quite as much, then people will schedule very intriguing non-conference games. If your 3 conference games don't matter to you making the playoff, then why wouldn't USC schedule, Notre Dame and then like Georgia and like Utah or something, like, why wouldn't USC schedule like the most interesting? My personal dream non-conference schedule is Notre Dame, Utah, and Oklahoma, because then that's super awesome. Like, could you imagine us playing Utah and Oklahoma in the same non-conference schedule? It would be incredibly toxic on Twitter, and I would be having the time of my life. Like, it would be awesome. And yeah, like losing would be disappointing, but if USC won, it would be fantastic. And so, teams would be more willing to take those risks, I think, if you could go 9-3, but 9-0 in conference play and make the playoff. And so that's why I'm kind of okay with the idea of, not factoring in overall record as much and it being about winning conference championships. I also think that if you, factor in overall record as much and it's more about the standings, then like teams give up less easily. Like, the thing about Clemson, where I'm okay with them making the playoff, is like they didn't give up on their season. Like they kept trying, they kept fighting, they kept trying to make the conference championship game and then win the conference championship game so they can make it in the playoff. Like if they don't really have a path with 3 losses, then maybe they start, playing their freshmen earlier in the season. They start, just kind of looking towards the future. And it's not like the NFL. Like in college, every game matters anyway, and you should be motivated to play every game anyway. But it is still, there are still things that you can do to kind of like punt on this year and look towards next year. So I think, making it more about the conference standings and less about the overall record does that in my head. But yeah, I do think, taking it back to the USC Notre Dame rivalry, like this is only a game. And actually, who made some great comments about this rivalry? This is something I forgot to mention. I was going to mention at the beginning of my whole spiel on this, is Zach Hansen actually came out and said, really like this could end up being good for us. And, there's oftentimes a lot more that you can learn from losing than winning. I was like, thank you, Zach Hansen. That's what I said on Sunday. That's what I've been, kind of preaching to the choir, is that this is a non-conference loss and USC is still very much in the Big Ten race. And now what they need to do is learn and move forward. And so that's the kind of, and, someone on that coaching staff knows how to talk about it because, Zach Hansen did it. So that's kind of the attitude that I want to see, is like being unafraid to play them in the sense that, they feel like they can win and they're confident. Like you need to make championship winning decisions before you can win the championships. Like if you need to make the confident choice that I'm going to play these teams and I'm confident that I can get my team ready to beat them before you can get your team ready to beat them. Like if you're playing like, oh, we're just going to kind of, ice skate our way into the playoff around these really easy teams, then like you're going to play like a soft team. So I think you need to make those decisions and be unafraid, to go in there and win, but also be unafraid if the result is that you lose, because, I think the potential benefits could be greater than the potential drawbacks, especially as we continue to expand the playoff. So that's kind of my spiel on that.
Well, so Ethan, you talked about how the Notre Dame game, win or lose, like it's a vehicle for improvement. And so we have our rock star, Michael Richardson, with a $50 super chat. Michael, thank you so much. Very generous from you. We're glad to have you back following our show again. Michael says, we as fans are not often as smart as we think. We rant seemingly as experts. Matt says USC is not living up to the standard. But are we as fans living up to the standard? Honestly, fans and analysts also have opportunities for improvement. And so, Michael, well said. I mean, I agree with every word here. Like none of us should act as though we have it all figured out. People have accused me of doing that. Like, I have it all figured out. I don't. But when I try to provide analysis, and I'm really speaking to Michael here as well as everyone watching here at the Voice of College Football, like I know I don't know everything, but I talk about the things I do know about. Like I do not try to talk about things I don't know anything about, because then I'm going to make a real fool of myself. I try and pick the things where, you know what, football, like life, is hard. Winning's hard. This is complicated stuff. I do not know everything there is to know about football. Like Lincoln Riley knows a lot more about football than I ever will. But I try and identify the things that, we can certainly circle and identify at home. Like if you coach Mekhi Lemon on a trick play to, okay, here's what's going to happen, or here's the script, here's the design. If it doesn't work, throw the ball away. Like that is football 101. That is Pop Warner. That is, grade school, like simplicity. and Mekhi Lemon doesn't throw the ball away. So, like, I try and be critical when I know I have something salient to say, and when I know the coaching staff failed to live up to not an elite standard, just a basic standard of competence. If the play is shut down, throw the ball away. Like, that is as simple as it gets. And Lincoln Riley's USC can't even do the small stuff like that. Can't even cover a kickoff after taking a 24-21 lead over Notre Dame. So, like, I don't try and rip people for the sake of doing it. It's when they can't do really basic things. And that speaks to the improvement that USC needs to make. And as an analyst, like, I want to be fair, but I also want to be tough. Like, because I don't believe that, it is a sign of respect when you criticize someone else, especially in your family. Like, you respect that person, you want that person to be his or her best self, so you're going to be critical, not to tear down, not just, to throw shade, not just to be a hater, but no, like, hey, there's this thing you could be doing better. I'm going to tell you how to do it better. Like, you're engaging in self-improvement, not to get all biblical on everybody, but like, this is a lot of what St. Paul writes in his letters, like Romans, Corinthians, like, gentle, patient instruction, just kind of illustrating that concept. Like, if you respect someone, you're going to correct them, not to be a scold, not to be a nanny, not to be a jerk, especially, but just like, hey, you want somebody to improve and get better. And I think that Michael Richardson's comment is made in that spirit. And I think it just kind of lends itself to that larger idea of, you know what, we're not trying to hate or tear down, but we are trying to point out, hey, there are some real flaws. There are some real things that need to be fixed in this shop here at USC. And there's a lot of room for growth. And really, a lot of what Ethan Inman has written at Trojans Wire, a lot of what Crash Collier has said as well, points to, hey, growth, development, like, let's just get it right. Let's get on the right path. And maybe USC can see a brighter day under Lincoln Riley. All right, folks, so no show on Sunday because there's no game. So just enjoy a margarita on a hammock on a beach, or, the NFL slate, whatever floats your boat. We're going to be back at you next Tuesday for the Nebraska preview. And like Ethan, Ethan knows Nebraska. Ethan's going to be bringing his fastball next Tuesday for the Huskers. Like, I know that game matters a lot to him. Not that it doesn't matter to Crash, but like, Ethan has some Nebraska connections, and it's going to be like he's going to be extra revved up for that one. So you get that next Tuesday at our normal time, same bat channel, 10 p.m. in the East, 7 p.m. in Los Angeles, and the rest of the West. And a reminder, bonus cuts, knife and fork, be ready to dig into those bonus cuts. We're continuing to produce them. Ethan, Crashlet Collier, and myself, you join at the middle Heisman tier or the top national champion tier. That, in addition to Michael Richardson's super chats, is a way to support the USC channel here at the Voice of College Football. So for Crashlet Collier, and Ethan Inman, this is Matt Zemek. Have a wonderful week. We will see you next Tuesday. Fight on, everybody.